Let's enjoy masterpieces. Happy readers. Grade 3. The Secret Garden.
Chapter 1. Mary Lennox. Mary Lennox had a thin little face and a thin little body, thin light hair and a very sour expression. She never smiled, not once during the long trip to England. She had come from India, where a terrible disease had killed thousands of people. Among the dead were Mary's mother and father. She didn't miss them very much, since she hardly knew them. Her parents were always away somewhere for important business. Mary Lennox hardly even knew what their faces looked like. Instead of parents, Mary had servants that took care of her. She only needed to ask people for whatever she needed. Unfortunately, Mary grew up believing that everybody was her servant. Now that Mary's parents were dead, the girl had only one relative. His name was Mr. Archibald Craven. Mary didn't know anything about the man, but she would live in his house until she was 18 years old. When Mary finally arrived in England, Mrs. Medlock, Archibald Craven's housekeeper, met her at the port. "Are you my servant?" Mary asked. Grunted Mrs. Medlock. "You'd better mind your manners. I work for your uncle, not for you. I'm supposed to bring you to Yorkshire. That's where your new home will be. Follow me. We have to catch the 2 o'clock train. Hurry up." On the train, Mary mostly just stared out the window and watched the English landscape roll by. How different it seemed from India. "Wake up, dear. We've arrived. It's time to go to Misselthwaite Manor," said Mrs. Medlock. "What's Misselthwaite Manor?" "That's the name of your new home. It's a huge castle that has belonged to the Craven family for hundreds of years. It has a very big lake beside it and many gardens. There are 100 rooms in the house. Most of them are locked, though." "Why are they locked?" Mary asked. "Mr. Craven likes it that way." "Why?" "Well, it's a long story. Mr. Craven is a crooked man. That set him wrong. He was a sour young man until he was married. His wife was very beautiful, and he loved her very much. When she died, he became even stranger. He locked himself in his room for months. Nowadays, he comes out once in a while, but he hardly ever meets people. I'm sure he won't meet you either." When they arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, Mary couldn't believe her eyes. The castle was bigger than anything she'd ever seen or imagined. The gardens surrounding the castle were beautiful, even though the flowers weren't blooming yet. "Come on, Mary. I'll show you to your room," said Mrs. Medlock. Mary was led up 3 staircases and down a long corridor to her room. Inside, a fire was burning in the fireplace, and a table was set with a delicious supper. "This is your room, Mary. You must stay in here while you're in the house. Outside, you can go wandering as much as you like." "Yes, ma'am," Mary said. As the girl sat down to supper, she felt more lonely than she had ever felt before. The next morning, Mary was woken up by a maid named Martha. "It's time to get up now," said Martha with a big smile. "Come on, get dressed." "I don't know how to dress myself." "Then it's time you should learn." Mary was shocked a little, but dressed herself for the first time in her life. Martha brought her a big breakfast. "You eat up now, then go outside and play." "Won't you come and play with me?" Mary asked. "No, you'll have to play by yourself from now on. If you're lucky, maybe you'll run into my little brother, Dickon." "Dickon?" "Yes, Dickon's a little boy who makes friends with animals." "Where can I find Dickon?" Mary asked. "Oh, he's usually around somewhere. You'll probably find him in the gardens." "What gardens?" Martha laughed. "You're full of questions, aren't you? I mean the gardens surrounding the manor. There are quite a few of them, but there's one you can't go into. It's locked up." "Why is it locked?" "Well, that's where Mrs. Craven died 10 years ago. She climbed up into a tree one day and then fell out of it. After that, Mr. Craven locked the gate to the garden and buried the key." Mary liked the idea of a secret garden. It sounded strange and exciting to her. "You go and play now," said Martha. As Mary walked outside, she could see tall trees all around. There also were flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes. There were no leaves on trees, however, and the flowers were not blooming yet. Walking down one path, Mary noticed one wall that was covered in ivy, but seemed to have no door in it. She could see tall trees behind the wall. "There must be a gate along here somewhere," Mary said. At that moment, Mary heard a robin singing in one of the trees above her. As she looked up, she noticed it jumping between branches. It seemed as if it was trying to get her attention. His cheerful whistle brought a small smile to her sad face. As Mary returned to Misselthwaite Manor, she began to think a lot about the secret garden. She felt that the garden must be beyond the wall that she had walked along. That night, as Mary sat in bed thinking about the secret garden, she heard a strange sound. At first, she thought it was the wind howling. But then, she noticed that the sound was coming from inside the castle. It sounded like a boy crying. Mary walked out of her room and knocked on Martha's door. "Martha, Martha," she called. "I think I hear a boy crying." Martha opened the door and said, "Nonsense, it's just the wind." "But the sound is coming from inside the house." "No, it's not. Now you go to bed right now." That night, Mary had 2 dreams. One dream was a happy one. It was about a secret garden with roses and wildflowers blooming. The other dream wasn't so happy. It was about a boy crying in a room with no mother or father to take care of him. Chapter 2. Way to the Secret Garden. Every day, Mary always did the same things. After breakfast, Mary would walk in the gardens. Often she would hear the sound of the boy crying at night, but she was always told that it was just the wind. One day, as Mary was walking in the gardens, she smelled something wet and muddy. It smelled like something living. "Springtime is coming," she said aloud. Suddenly, Mary heard a bird call over her shoulder. It was the robin that Mary had seen on her first day at the manor. Mary walked toward the bird. It didn't fly away, as Mary expected it to. The bird was standing on a rusty ring on a small mound of earth. It looked like maybe a dog had been digging there. Mary pulled the ring out of the hole. "What's this?" she cried. A key was attached to the ring. Mary felt very excited all of a sudden. "I wonder if this is the key to the secret garden," she thought. And then a strange thing happened. To Mary, it was almost like magic. A gust of wind blew aside some ivy from the wall. On the wall, Mary could clearly see the round knob of a door. Below the knob was a keyhole. Mary knew then that this was the door to the secret garden. What else could it be? Her hand shook so much that she almost couldn't put the key in the keyhole. Mary looked around to make sure that no one was looking. Then, quietly, she slipped through the doorway and closed the door behind her. "Oh my!" Mary said as she looked around herself. The high walls of the garden were covered with the stems of roses. The rose bushes were scattered throughout the garden and were tangled together. "I must be in heaven," she said. On the ground, the grass was brown. There were the stems of wild flowers everywhere, but Mary couldn't see any buds either. The garden was a beautiful place, but there didn't seem to be much life. Perhaps it was wonderful because it was Mary's own place. Nobody else knew about it except for Mr. Craven, and he never went there anyway. Mary looked closely at a flower bed. She pulled away some leaves, dead grass, and weeds from the ground. When she put her nose right to the ground, she could see a few little pale green points sticking out of the ground. "This garden isn't quite dead yet," she said. Mary went home that evening happily. She had found her secret place in the world. She decided to make that garden come back to life. At dinner time, Mary suddenly said, "I need a shovel." "What do you need a shovel for?" Martha asked. Mary knew that she had to keep her secret place. "Well, this is such a lovely place. I thought that if I had a little shovel and some seed, I could make a little garden." "Well, that's a wonderful idea. Why don't you write a letter to my little brother Dickon? He knows all the best places to buy that stuff. He's always gardening." After dinner, Mary wrote a letter to Dickon. She wrapped some money up with the letter and put it in the envelope. "Oh, I can't wait," Mary said excitedly. It had been almost a month since Mary had come to the manor. She was becoming fatter, healthier, and happier than she had ever been. The next morning, Mary learned that Mr. Craven had gone to Austria for a trip. Besides a couple of servants and Mary, there would be no one left in the house. "No one will disturb me now," she thought. "I can work in the garden as I please." When she walked down the path to the garden early that morning, she heard a strange whistling sound. Mary saw a boy sitting in a tree. On his shoulder was a squirrel. Around him were several robins and rabbits sitting on their hind legs. The animals all seemed to be listening to the boy's song. "Don't come any closer," the boy said. "You'll scare the animals away." Mary stopped walking. "Hi, I'm Dickon," he said. "And you must be Mary. Pleased to meet you. I've brought the garden tools and the seeds you were asking for." He spoke to her as if he knew her quite well. "Thanks, Dickon," said Mary. "I'm very happy to meet you too. How come you have so many animal friends?" "Why, because I'm an animal myself. Come on, Mary. Let's start gardening. Where's your garden?" Mary knew then that she couldn't keep her garden to herself forever. "Dickon," Mary said, "can you keep a secret?" "I always keep secrets," he said. "Don't tell anybody. I've stolen a garden." "What do you mean you've stolen a garden?" "Well, there's this garden that has been locked up for many years. Mr. Craven said that nobody could go into the garden. I found that garden myself. It's dying because nobody has taken care of it in years." "All right, Mary, show me the garden. If there's anybody who can bring it back to life, I can." Mary then led Dickon to the secret garden. Dickon looked around and around. He was just as amazed as Mary was to see the garden. It is a strange, pretty place. They worked all day long that sunny day. They weeded and raked leaves. They planted seeds and pulled out dead flowers. They watered plants and made flower beds. "There's a lot more work to do," Dickon said, seeing all that they had done. "Will you come again and help me?" Mary asked. "I'll come every day if you want me to," he answered, with a big smile on his face. "It's the best fun I ever had in my life. Shut in here and wakening up a garden." At the end of the long day, as Mary lay in bed, she felt like she had begun a new life. England was no longer a lonely place. It was a place full of animals, friends, flowers, and a secret garden. Who could want anything more? Chapter 3. The Little Craven, Colin. That night, Mary was woken up by the crying sound again. "That isn't the wind," she said. "I know it isn't. I'm going to find out where that crying is coming from." Mary got up and walked down a long, dark corridor. The sound was becoming louder. Suddenly, she saw a glimmer of light coming from beneath a door. Someone was crying in the room beyond the door. It sounded like a young boy. Mary opened the door. In the room, Mary saw a boy lying on a bed crying. The boy looked very thin and white. He looked sick. When the boy saw Mary, he screamed, "A ghost! A ghost! Help!" "Be quiet," Mary whispered. "Do I look like a ghost to you?" "I suppose not. Who are you then?" "My name's Mary Lennox. Who are you?" Mary stared at his eyes. They were gray and looked too big for his face. "I'm Colin Craven. I'm Archibald Craven's son." Mary clapped her hands with delight. "That's wonderful. That means that you're my little cousin. Mr. Craven is my uncle. But why didn't you go to Austria with your father?" "I never go anywhere with him. In fact, I haven't even seen him for a long time. He doesn't like to look at me because I remind him of my mother. She died when I was a baby, so I spend most of my time alone. My doctor said I'm not supposed to meet people. He's worried that I might catch the flu from them. If I live, I may be a hunchback like my father, but I'm too sick to live." "My mother died too," said Mary. "So did my father. That's why I'm living here." "That's strange. How come I haven't seen you around here?" Colin asked. "Oh, I spend most of my time in my garden." Mary realized then that she had said something she shouldn't have said. "What garden?" Colin asked. "Oh, it's just a garden nearby." "Which one?" Mary didn't want to say too much, for she was afraid Colin would tell others about the garden. But Mary felt bad about lying to her cousin. He was so much like herself. "Colin, can you keep a secret?" she asked. "I guess so. I don't know. I've never had a secret before." "Okay, if you tell me your secret, I promise I won't tell anybody about it." "There's a secret garden nearby," Mary said. "Your father didn't want anyone to go in there, so he locked the door to the garden and buried the key. But I found the key. Now, a boy named Dickon and I are trying to bring the garden back to life." As Mary spoke about the secret garden, Colin's eyes grew wide. He had never heard about such an exciting and mysterious place. "Mary, could you take me to the garden?" Colin asked. "I really want to go. If only someone could push my wheelchair out there. You're not supposed to leave the house. But since my father is gone, I'm in charge here. The servants have to listen to everything I say." "I don't know, Colin. I think Mrs. Medlock will be very angry if you go outside." Colin had a very sad look on his face. "If you get better, Colin, then maybe I can take you outside." All right, I will, Colin said happily. I'll get better. Then take me outside to the garden. Please, Mary, please do that for me. Mary and Colin talked late into the evening. They spoke about many things. Mary told Colin how life had been in India, and Colin told her how he felt being in a dark room with only books. But the thing that they spoke the most about was the garden. He wanted to know where it was, what kind of flowers there were, and how big it was. On and on, Colin asked question after question. The boy felt happier that evening than he had in a long time. It rained heavily the next day. Since Mary couldn't go out in the rain, she was with Colin for the whole day. When Martha found Mary in Colin's room, she got angry. "It's okay," Colin said. "She has my permission to stay here." The servants couldn't say no to Colin. When Colin's doctor came, he was very upset as well. "What if this girl gives you the flu?" "She won't. Besides, I feel healthier when she's around," said Colin. The doctor saw that this was true. Colin looked healthier than he had. The rain continued for a week, and Mary spent the week with Colin. There was the constant sound of laughter from his room. Every day, Colin seemed to get stronger and stronger. He really wanted to go to the garden. On the first clear morning, Mary woke up very early. She opened the window and smelled fresh air. As soon as she put on her clothes, Mary ran to the garden. Dickon was already hard at work. "Look," Dickon said, "the garden is alive." Mary looked around. It was true. Green points were pushing through the earth everywhere. Leaf buds were growing on the rose bushes. Flowers were blooming orange, purple, yellow, and red. Best of all, the robin was building a nest. "When did this happen?" Mary asked, amazed. "Over the last week. The rain did the garden some good." Mary was happy to see such life in something that she believed was dead. As Mary worked with Dickon that morning, she told him about Colin. Dickon had already known about him from Martha. People say Mr. Craven can't see him when he is awake, because his eyes look exactly like his mother's. I feel sorry for Colin, and he really wants to visit the garden. He can't because he's so sick. "That's too bad," said Dickon. "We must bring him outside with us. I can push his wheelchair easily enough." When Mary went to see Colin after dinner, Colin was very sad. He had spent a beautiful spring day inside all alone. He looked as bad as he had looked the first time Mary saw him. "Mary," Colin said, "I think I'm going to die. I'll never see your garden." "Nonsense," Mary said. "You just feel bad because you stay inside all the time. You never breathe the fresh air. You never use your muscles. You need to go outside." "No, Mary," he said, "I can't. I'm growing a hump on my back. I can feel it. Look." Mary looked at his back. "There's nothing there, Colin. You're imagining everything. You have to come work in our garden. The sooner the better." "All right, Mary," he said. "I'll come with you as soon as I can." Then Mary told Colin about the budding leaves and the blooming flowers. That night, Colin dreamed about the earth and the flowers, the animals and the plants. He dreamed about the secret garden. Chapter 4. I'll live forever. The next morning, Mary went to Colin's room and said, "I'm going to see Dickon, but I'll come back." In 5 minutes, she was with Dickon in the garden. When Mary and Dickon started working, she told him about what Colin had said the night before. In the springtime, everyone should be outside working, Dickon said. Folks need to be listening to the birds and digging in the dirt. If people aren't doing that, then they aren't living. We need to bring him out with us soon. Then he'll get better. I have an idea, said Mary. Since he can't come out here, why don't we bring the garden to him? Dickon was confused. What do you mean? I mean, let's bring him some of the animals and the plants from the garden. That sounds like a wonderful idea. It seemed as if a magician visited the garden every day and night. When Mary went back and sat down close to Colin's bed, he began to sniff. "What's the smell?" he asked. "It's the wind from the garden," replied Mary. The next morning, Mary burst into Colin's room. "Spring has come," she yelled out. "Let's open the windows, Colin." Mary opened all of the windows in the room. The room was filled with the sounds of birds singing. A fresh breeze came in the window. She placed 2 potted roses on the windowsill. It's time that you stopped thinking about death and humps on your back. It's time to think about being healthy. Come in, Dickon. Dickon walked in the room. "Hello, Colin," he said. Colin was amazed at what he saw. He almost jumped out of bed with excitement. Dickon had robins on his shoulders, and he was carrying a baby lamb in his arms. A little red fox also walked by his side. As Dickon placed the lamb on the floor, 2 squirrels ran in the door. They jumped on Colin's bed, and the boy cried for joy. Colin decided at that moment that he would go outside that day. "I need someone to push my wheelchair," he said. "I can do that," Dickon said. "You don't need to worry about falling either." Colin then called Mrs. Medlock. "Please tell all of the servants that I'm going outside today," he told her. "And I may go out every day from now on if the weather is nice. When I go outside, I don't want any servants to follow me. Mary and Dickon will take care of me. You don't have to worry about anything." "Yes, Colin," Mrs. Medlock said. Then Colin did something that surprised everyone. He threw the blankets off of himself and placed his feet on the floor. Very slowly, he stood up. His legs shook a lot. He took 5 short steps and sat in the wheelchair. As he sat down, Colin was dripping with sweat. "I haven't stood up in 2 years," he said. Dickon pushed Colin to the staircase. Then he helped him to walk down the stairs and outside. Colin sat down again in his wheelchair all by himself. As Colin was pushed along the pathway, tears of joy fell down his face. When at last they got to the gate of the secret garden, the children began to whisper. "Okay, Colin," Mary whispered. "You can't tell anyone about this place." "Quick, quick, push me in," Colin said. "Somebody may see us." As Colin was pushed into the secret garden, he gasped. The whole garden was alive with colors, sounds, and smells. The flower beds and rose bushes looked like they were painted violet, blue, yellow, and red. The roses formed bridges above their heads. Bees buzzed through the flowers and birds sang in the trees. Colin had spent hours imagining what the garden would be like. But he never imagined it was as beautiful as this. As the sun fell upon Colin's face, Mary noticed that he looked different. He had a glow of color in his cheeks and his eyes sparkled. "I'll get well," he cried out. "I'll get well and I'll live forever. I've seen the spring. Now I'm going to see the summer. I'm going to see everything grow here. I'm going to grow here too." That day, Colin got out of his chair and walked around a little. And when he came back the next day, he walked a little more. Soon, he was strong enough to work in the garden. As the weeks passed, Colin worked hard in the garden. Some days, however, he preferred to sit back and watch everything grow. One day, as the children lay in the sweet-smelling grass, Mary asked Colin something she'd wanted to ask him for a long time. "What are you going to tell your father when he comes home?" "I won't tell him anything. I'm just going to walk up to him and show him how healthy I am." Colin was as healthy and strong as anybody of his age. In addition to the work that Colin did in the garden, he started exercising every day. Soon, he became strong. He seemed to be growing as well. One day, Colin dropped his shovel and said, "Mary, Dickon, look at me." Colin stood up very straight. "Do you remember the first day you brought me here?" "Of course," Dickon replied. "All at once, I remember what I looked like that day." It seems strange. I was so sick then. But I'm so healthy now. Can it be true? Am I really well?" "Yes, you are, Colin," Mary said. "I am. I know it now. I really will live forever." "I wish my father would come home. I want him to see me now, and I wish my mother were alive too. I wish she could see what a strong young boy I am." "I think your mother is alive," said Dickon. "I think she's alive in this very garden. She's growing in the flowers and in the trees. She's growing in the grass and the bushes. And she's growing in you too, Colin." Chapter 5. It's me, Father. That spring, the secret garden came alive. The children came alive with it. There was a man, however, who hadn't felt alive in a long time. He had traveled around the world for 10 years, but he never felt anything but sadness and boredom. He was a tall man with crooked shoulders and an unhappy face. His name was Archibald Craven. He traveled to many beautiful places, but he never stayed anywhere for more than a few days. He was so sad that he never noticed the beautiful things around him. One day, a strange thing happened. He was in a beautiful valley in Austria. The valley was very quiet. He had walked a long way alone. He began to feel tired and lay down by a stream to take a nap. When he fell asleep, he began to dream. His dream was so real, however, that he didn't think he was dreaming. He thought he heard someone calling him. The voice was far away. "Archie!" He heard, and then again. He heard the voice clearer than before. "Archie!" "Lilias, Lilias, is that you?" Lilias was Archibald Craven's dead wife. "Lilias, where are you?" The voice came back like a beautiful song. "I'm in the garden." Then the dream ended. When he woke up, he felt very calm and happy. He thought about the dream carefully. "In the garden," he said to himself, "but the door is locked and the key is buried." Archibald looked at the stream. He saw birds come and dip their heads in it. After taking a drink, they flew away. He looked carefully at a bunch of wildflowers. The leaves of the flowers were wet from the splashing stream. The flowers were deep blue. The color reminded him of the lake next to Misselthwaite Manor. Archibald found himself looking at them as he had looked at such things years ago. "I will go back home," he said. On the long train ride back to his home, Archibald thought about his son. He realized that he hadn't paid any attention to him for 10 years. In fact, he had only wanted to forget about him. He had not meant to be a bad father, but he had hardly been a father at all. He rarely even saw the boy. He only saw Colin when he was asleep. "I have been a bad father," Archibald said to himself. "Maybe I can change. Maybe I can be a good father to him from now on." As the train passed through beautiful valleys of England, Archibald Craven smiled. It had been years since he had smiled. He felt peace, and even more importantly, he felt hope. He knew that his life would get better. He knew that he could make a difference in Colin's life. When Archibald finally arrived back home, he called for Mrs. Medlock. "How is my son, Mrs. Medlock?" "You should go see for yourself, Mr. Craven. I think you'll be surprised." "Where is he then?" "He's in the garden. He goes there every day now." No other people are allowed to go near. Archibald then went to the garden. He walked down the same path that Mary had walked down on her first day at Misselthwaite Manor. He walked to the garden's door and stopped. He knew where the door was, even though the ivy hid it, but he couldn't remember where he had buried the key. Where could that key be? He thought. Just then he heard sounds. The sounds seemed to be coming from the garden. He heard children playing and laughing aloud. That's strange, he thought. Nobody has been in that garden for 10 years. Suddenly, Archibald heard a shout of laughter, and a boy ran through the doorway. The boy ran right into Archibald's arms. He was a tall, handsome boy. He was glowing with life. His strange gray eyes made Mr. Craven gasp for breath. He had never thought of such a meeting. "Oh, who are you, little boy?" he asked. "It's me, Father." "Don't you recognize your own son, Colin?" Mr. Craven couldn't believe his eyes. His boy looked strong and healthy. He had color in his cheeks and in his eyes. He seemed happy. He didn't look at all like the Colin Craven that Archibald knew. "Colin? I can't believe it. Is that really you? You look so different." "That's because I've grown, Father. I stopped dying and I started living. I was brought back to life, just like this garden. I want to show you something. Come with me, Father." Colin then led his father into the garden. The garden was alive with color. It looked more beautiful than it had ever looked before. The colors and the smells of the flowers made Mr. Craven very happy. "I thought this garden would be dead," Archibald said. "I thought so too at first," said Mary. "Your niece Mary brought it alive again," said Dickon. "Dickon and Colin helped as well," Mary said. "A little magic helped too, and a robin showed me the door." "And then the garden brought me back to life," said Colin. Then they sat under a tree, and Colin told his father everything. "I don't want this garden to be a secret any more, Father," said Colin. "I want it to be open so that everyone can come here. I want other sick boys to come here as well. They can be brought back to life just like I was." Then Archibald Craven and his son walked back to the castle. The servants came out and greeted them. They looked at the boy carefully and realized that he was a new person. Mr. Craven told his servants that the walls of the garden should be torn down. That autumn, the garden changed again. The leaves changed from green to red, yellow, orange, and brown. The flowers withered as well. Sick children came from around Yorkshire to see the garden. They were happy to see the leaves falling. They knew that the garden would come alive again next year. And maybe they would too.